Hello everyone, my name is Rebecca, and in this video we're going to be improving my art with knowledge I learned from a pro artist. I've been wanting to level up my art, but I've been feeling kind of stuck on how to do so. My usual methods don't really feel like they've been having as much of an impact. So when Colosso reached out to me asking if I wanted to try one of their online classes, I was really excited. I've taken Colosso art classes in the past and they were really helpful. Colosso is a global online learning platform offering in-depth classes in creative fields like illustration, motion design, 3D modeling, and many more. They work with top-tier professionals to help aspiring creators develop their skills. The class I chose to take is Freelance and Portfolio Guide for Aspiring Illustrators by Soyoong. I chose this class because it covers a wide range of topics from creating commissioned illustrations to upgrading your portfolio and personalized study methods. Plus, their art style is absolutely stunning. It's so pretty. Like I said, this class covers a lot of topics, but for this video, we are mostly going to be focusing in on section 4, upgrading your portfolio, expressing what you want. In part 19, Soyoong talks about setting clear goals to avoid frustration, and this really resonated with me. I feel like that's partially been my problem. I want to improve, but I'm not defining where and how I want to improve. After some thought, I decided that for this video, I would focus in on drawing and rendering clothing folds. I feel like this is an area where my skills have weakened, and it's been sort of a trouble area for me. I feel like I can roughly sketch in clothing folds, but I have a hard time being more exact with them as well as rendering them, so that's what I'm going to be working on. In part 20, Soyoong guides us on how to do croquet drawing sessions. I'm sorry if I'm not saying that correctly. To be honest, I never really heard of a croquet until taking this course. Soyoong describes croquet as meaning both sketch and quick, simple drawing. She went over many types of croquet, and a tip she gave about brushes was something I never considered before. She recommends using different brushes depending on what you're trying to work on. Like using a brush with no opacity or pressure sensitivity can help find your weak points since you need to be more exact. And since I feel like my way of drawing clothing wrinkles needs to be more exact, I'm going to use a brush with no opacity change and no pressure sensitivity. And it definitely was a challenge. I never realized how much I rely on my brushes. Having to be so much more exact with my lines makes me realize even more how much I just draw lines willy-nilly. Also, I found all my references for these on Pinterest. Something Soyoong talks about is being very intentional and thoughtful with which references you grab. Like making sure to choose references that fit the goals you're trying to meet. So I chose references that were making the clothing folds very clear, since this is something I wanted to work on. Something else Soyoong talks about is how long you should spend on doing these studies. They said if you're a beginner, you shouldn't worry too much about the timer, and that it may be better to take your time. Short croquets that are only a few minutes are great for learning gesture and motion, while longer studies can be more helpful for more detailed or technical things. Since I am wanting to be a bit more precise, I decided to let myself do longer studies, around 10 minutes. Although I didn't stick too hard to this deadline because I was also trying to entertain my 4-month-old while doing this. However, I could tell that for this one, I needed to keep moving. I was starting to get a little frustrated and nitpicky. And when I started to feel like that, I decided to try to just keep moving forward instead of getting too caught up in making things perfect. The purpose of this is to learn, not make things perfect. Also, like I said, Colosso offers classes on a wide range of topics, like illustration, animation, video games, and even baking and food-related classes. Another class I look forward to learning from is the Complete Guide to 2D Indie Animation Production. The animation looks so pretty, so I'm looking forward to doing these classes in my spare time. I think something that can be really nice about taking an online class versus something like YouTube tutorials is that the class is all connected and it's with one professional, so you get to learn more in depth about their process. I really enjoyed Soyoong's teaching style. She's very relatable and explains things really well. Even though she's speaking in Korean and I have to follow along with subtitles, I didn't have any issue following along with what she was saying. One little critique I have is that I do wish the slides were translated in some way. Like maybe subtitles could be overlaid on top of the Korean text. I've seen other classes do that, and I feel like this would have helped make the slides a bit more helpful for me. But that's my only critique really. I really enjoyed the class. So back to my studies, I want to say that I have no idea who this character is. If you know who they are, please let me know down in the comments. As I was doing these studies, I was referring to anime drawings since they often have to draw clothing wrinkles in a clear and kind of stylistic way. For this study, I learned that it can be helpful to include breaks in your line work instead of having the lines all be connected. It's cool to see how much a small change like including these gaps can help things feel more airy and not so stiff. Lastly, for this croquet session, I did this quick study from an anime screenshot. This one is from Tsurune. I was reminded of this anime during the class, and I remembered how much I liked the art style. It's really pretty. I let myself use a pencil brush for this one because I was starting to get tired of the very defined brush. While I do think it was very good to do these studies with that brush, I did not like it very much. It felt very odd. I usually only use that brush when I'm mimicking anime screenshots, but the fact that I didn't like it and that it felt out of my comfort zone probably meant it was kind of pushing me, so that's probably a good thing. Oh, and I also drew a version of this shirt with my usual line art brush to illustrate how much line weight can have an impact when it comes to drawing clothing folds. The ability to make some lines more bold and some lines more subtle is very helpful in adding more depth and variety. I feel like line weight is something I need to be more attentive to in my usual work. After I drew all of these drawings, I took time to write out some simple notes. In part 19, Soyoong talks about how it's important to be able to explain what you learned like you're trying to teach a friend. So I kept note of some things that I learned in a simple way. Things like remember points of tension, lines go towards them, include gaps in the line work, line weight can have a great impact, body movement can cause fabric to bunch, gravity pulls on fabric. In section 4, there is a part titled A Guide to Copying, and I found this section to be very helpful, and I'll talk more in depth as to why in a moment. For now, I will show you what I am copying and why. So for this copy session, I'm actually going to try to copy the way Soyoong colored these overalls. I decided to just trace over the overalls since this is more about the coloring, not drawing the overalls. Plus, tracing is something that Soyoong talks about. They mention how it can be a great learning tool for breaking down art that you admire or that you want your style to be more like. Of course, they're only talking about tracing as a learning method, not to steal other people's work. I just want to make sure that's clear. I found this section on copying to be very interesting because in my head, I think I've always thought of doing studies like croquets and copying as sort of the same thing. But Soyoong describes croquet as being practiced for quickly capturing forms of lines, whereas colored copying is for improving descriptive skills. And I feel like straight up copying and trying to draw something that is very close to the original is something that I don't do super often, but this drawing session showed me how it can be really helpful. Once again, I was trying to be very purposeful when trying to decide what I wanted to copy. I decided to copy this because I loved how colorful the overalls looked with this pop of color. I also really liked the looseness in the coloring and the ability to see some of the brush strokes. Plus, I just really love Soyoong's coloring style. It's so pretty. Something I learned from this copy session is that I need to push values more. As always, I shy away from darker shadows, and I kept finding that I needed to use much darker colors than I usually would. I also learned that I love subtle variations in color, and this is something I kind of achieve in my art, but not to the extent that I would like. This might sound a bit funny, but I guess in many ways my art can feel a bit too perfect or airbrushy, and sometimes I like that, but I tend to also admire styles that have a more painty look, where you can see the brush strokes. But in order to see the brush strokes, I have to actually draw them. My usual style of shading doesn't really include actual brush strokes, since it is often a lot softer and applied with an airbrush. Whereas with this way of coloring, I'm able to apply more texture and variation with the brush. So this is my copy of Soyoong's art. I didn't have the proper texture to apply to the overalls, but I still feel like I got pretty close. Soyoong recommends applying what you learn to your own art, because it's not very good if you learn something but you're not able to apply it to your own work. So now I'm going to redraw the clothes from this illustration and apply what I have learned to it. I chose to redraw the clothes from this picture because I've never really felt happy with how I drew and rendered them. They've always felt a bit lacking to me. Also, I'm a bit sad because I accidentally only recorded the Clip Studio Paint window while I was sketching the clothes, so I don't have that footage. But thankfully I do have the line art footage, so I can show you that. While I was redrawing these clothes, I was trying to keep things I learned from my croquets in mind. Like the shoulder is moving upwards, so this would make the fabric pull in that direction. I also tried to include some imperfections, so to speak, like I'm going to have the shirt slightly untucked out of the pants, and in areas where the shirt has a bit more slack, the lines will be a little bit more wobbly. to indicate softness. While doing my studies, I realized I can make things a bit too rigid or pristine, if that makes sense. Like, instead of letting my lines be a little bit wobbly for the clothes, I always make them really straight. Something I learned from my copying session is that I can have a tendency to make details too small, or I won't emphasize them enough. And this makes them so that they aren't as noticeable or they feel like they aren't there. For example, in the original, I included a fold on Faith's pants right here, but it's kind of small. This time I drew it larger and a bit more stylized. I think because I lack confidence in certain areas, instead of committing to a detail, I will have a tendency to diminish it. After the line work, I added the base colors, and now it was time to apply the shading. When applying shading, Soyoong talks about dividing the coloring into 2 tones, and then slowly breaking down areas into more tones. And I found this to be a nice way of applying colors without getting too overwhelmed. Like I said, I like how in Soyoong's art you can often still see the brush strokes and how there is a variety of colors. So for this coloring, I'm trying to not shy away from texture and brush strokes, and I'm going to try to include a variety of colors. Something I did have to be very careful of is using the blending tool. I really like the blending tool since it allows me to move things around and blend colors, but I needed to be careful to not overblend because then I would have the issue of losing my brush strokes again. I would just blend them out, so I was trying to not do that. A tip that Soyoong had was that texture can help a picture feel more dense and interesting. In my original picture, the shirt did have a texture to it. However, once again, it's very small and hard to see. This time, I tried to stylize the shirt's texture a bit more. I drew it larger, but also a bit softer. I will also go in with an eraser to erase the pattern in some spots so it doesn't feel too overpowering. Coloring in this way felt very freeing. I loved how loose I could be. It's kind of interesting, because there are so many folds and brush strokes, it felt like small imperfections didn't matter as much, or that I could be more loose and it was okay. Sometimes with my usual rendering style, it can feel like the smallest thing matters, almost like you have a white canvas with a dot on it. The dot wouldn't be noticeable if there are lots of other things on the canvas, but because the dot is the only thing, your eye is really drawn to it. So for this coloring, it feels like the dot doesn't matter as much, if that makes sense. Now, I'm not saying my art is going to change to this rendering style overnight, and that this is how I'm going to shade all my illustrations from now on. But I do want to try to apply a lot of what I learned today to my illustrations. I really love how colorful the shading ended up being. It looks so bright and vibrant, especially with the inclusion of the pop of color for the middle tone. This was a tip that Soyoong gave to make coloring more interesting, and it definitely does. I feel like I learned a lot from Soyoong's class, and I still have so many parts of it to watch. If you want to check out their class too, make sure to use the coupon in the description to get 33% off. And if you're interested in a different Colosso class, there is another coupon to get $45 off any class that you'd like. I'll have all of the links down in the description and pinned comment. So now that I've redrawn the clothes, let's compare. So here is the before, and here is the after. I felt like my coloring was colorful before, but this is even more colorful. I do feel like maybe I went a little overboard with the clothing wrinkles, but what do you all think? I can't tell if it feels like a lot to me because I'm not used to it, or if it actually needs to be toned down a little. Let me know. Overall though, I feel like this is the best I've drawn clothes in a really long time. Thank you so much to Colosso for allowing me to take Soyoong's class. I really enjoyed learning from it. Well, that is all for this video, but before we end, I want to thank my super awesome YouTube members and Patreon patrons for their support. It means so much to me. And thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you all in my next video. Bye!